Welcome everybody, and it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker and guild member, Emma Cox. Her title is Researching Huguenot Ancestry in France, but I think she's also going to look rather more generally at some French records. So Emma's a professional genealogist and a Huguenot descendant, and is the founder of a one-name study on one line, Fonblanque. I hope I've got that pronunciation, practiced it when I spoke to Emma recently. And they were in a Huguenot family from France who settled in England in the 1740s and migrated across the world. She also has at emmacox.co.uk her website, Emma Cox Genealogy, and she undertakes research, runs workshops and training sessions. She also has a podcast, Journeys into Genealogy, and has a wide range of topics with experts, historians, museum curators, and people who have interesting stories to tell. So Emma, we're really looking forward to hearing what you can tell us about how we can find out more about our Huguenot ancestry and for general research in France. Thank you.
Thank you for that lovely introduction, Alison, and it's good to be here this evening in England, and hello if it's a different time of the day when you're actually watching this. So, hang on one moment, let's just get things moving. So who am I? Just a little bit more information about me. So I'm a family historian and genealogist and a Huguenot descendant via my father's mother. So her name was Fonblanque, and Alison did say that correctly, so that's great. So I help people find out about their ancestors, put together trees, help write books, and take people on tours of the places their ancestors lived and worked. And I first started doing this over 30 years ago now, and it's taken me to all sorts of different places. And my family is actually really quite interesting in terms of Huguenot descendants, and they've specialised in lots of different areas, including the law, diplomacy, writing, all sorts of different things. And I'm very, very fortunate to actually have quite a lot of records myself. So some of those are the press cuttings that my great-grandfather, John Berkeley de Fonblanque, took when he was a solicitor at Lincoln's Inn in London in the 1930s. So he took different cases that he worked on. He also put family records in there if he went out to meals, all sorts of things like that. And it's lovely to be able to flick through those and actually get a sense of what he was interested in and how he lived his life. I've digitised some of those, and some of them are available on my website, and they make for fascinating reading. So I said we had a few lawyers, diplomats and writers and publishers. We also have merchants. I discovered that fairly on, my earliest Fonblanque ancestors, they actually were wine merchants near Tower Street in the City of London. And there's an Old Bailey court case which refers to the theft of juniper berries, several lots of juniper berries which were worth a lot of money at the time. And going further, or coming more towards us, in the 20th century, I've even got an Olympic horseman and various senior military officers. So the one name study is actually covering quite a wide range of different topics. So for anybody who doesn't know who the Huguenots were, they were Protestants who were persecuted in England and who left the country for safer places, such as Holland and England, and actually went further abroad. So sometimes they went to Ireland, sometimes they went across the water to North America. And they were persecuted, so they wanted religious freedom and also employment. So a lot of them came to places where there were existing Huguenots or where they thought they could actually work with somebody they already knew. And there are actually a great number of Huguenots, far more than many people think. And the first ones arrived in the times of Edward VI and Elizabeth I, late 1500s and early 1600s. But then the bulk of them were quite a few years later on, the 1670 to 1714. Another 40,000 arrived in England, especially after the revocation of the Edict of Nantes in 1685. So around about 50,000 people came across from France. And it's reckoned that 1 in 7 of us has Huguenot ancestry. It's a great article by Robin Gwynne on History Today, which mentions England's first refugees. I just want to go through my own Huguenot ancestry and give you a little bit more information about that, and make you think about things again, because I think one of the things about genealogists is we look at a piece of research and we think we know it. But when you know it, and then you need to go back again, and there might be more information that's been digitized, you might have found out about somebody that it refers to, and you can actually tease more information out from that. So mine all started with this family tree, which you can see on the right of the screen, the Greniers of Languedoc. And this was written in around about the late 1890s. And I actually have got some letters referring to this. And this used to sit in a rather smart wooden frame in my grandparents' hallway. And my grandmother was right down the bottom of it, and this tiny little thing, and it went back about 15 generations, going back to France. And then it has a blurb at the top of it, which explains a little bit more about where it's thought that they come from. So mine go prior to France and apparently back into Italy. So over the last 25 to 30 years, things have changed quite a lot. When I first started, there really wasn't an internet. And if you looked up Fonblanque, there was hardly anything online about it. Maybe half a dozen results would actually appear on whatever was the search engine at the time, because this was pre-Google. But nowadays, there is a lot of information. And I looked on the Society of Genealogists page earlier on today, and there's all sorts of different things on there, including wills, marriages, and different references there. So this is a close-up of my family tree. Just wanted to show you some of the information that's actually held on there, because it's really interesting in terms of what is there. So immediately at the top, you've got Père or Pierre de Grenier. It says the Gentilhomme Verrier, which is a gentleman glassblower, and in a place called Fabas, born in 1520 and died in 1549. So he didn't live a very long life. And it actually gives the provenance from where that came from. And his will is available. If we go down to the next generation, we have Naudette, who is the same as Gentilhomme Verrier, and then mentioned about his brothers. And then it talks about where Fabas actually is. So there was a lot of information on where they came from contained within the family tree itself, but it's not perfect because there are people missing. I descend from two different lines in this family tree, a brother and a sister, and for some reason the sister's actually been left off the tree altogether. It's also got information on there about different marriage dates and contracts and all sorts of things like that. I also have the family papers that are from my great-grandfather, and he employed a researcher in the 1950s, and he went out and went to the records office, and I've got the information that he actually came back with. So if you're going to do some Huguenot research, try and get as much of you have of the known side within England or wherever the country it is that you are actually researching from before you actually try and go back to France, because it will make things a lot easier if you have a good solid base to work from. Another tip is to trace living descendants of other branches of the family and exchange information, and be aware that this might take some time. I said I've been doing this for quite a long time. Well, about 3 years ago, I put up a request on Ancestry. I sent somebody a message and I didn't hear back from them. And about 4 or 5 months ago, I did. So 2.5 years later, she replied back and said, oh, I don't know anything about this, but my brother-in-law does. So she put me in touch with her brother-in-law, and we actually had a lovely Zoom conversation for about an hour or so, and he found some family portraits and he was sharing those with me. He was sharing an old family pedigree that he got, and we're hoping to actually go and see him when we go over to France in the summer. If you're going to do some research in the UK, as I recommended, there's some very useful resources, and I have put together a handout which will be available with this recording online when the website is updated. So Julie Goucher, who many of you will be familiar with, her website has a list of departments and archives in France. There's also the French genealogy blog by a lady called Anne Mordell, and she has some very interesting blog posts and resources available on her website. The Huguenot Society. If you are considering doing Huguenot research and you know you have Huguenot ancestry, I highly recommend joining. It's not expensive. It's around about £44 for the year. And you can see what records are available online. They have all sorts of information there. So there are Huguenot families. So you can actually see whether your family name is included within those. There are publications which reference the families as well. And they also have things like the bounty, where they paid out to Huguenot refugees. There's lots and lots of different records that are only available to members. If you find you have some information that's actually contained within the Huguenot Society library, which is held, and it's not actually at Kew, but you have to go to Kew to actually view the records. You can arrange that with Nicole, who is the librarian. And when I went over there in early 2022, I found lots of different records. So somebody had put together, they'd basically stuck down things like birth, marriage and death records. There was a Wagner pedigree as part of that. And somebody had written a book about family history. So I was able to take photographs of all of those and actually bring those back with me. And then I can work through and use the research that somebody else has already done, which is a great starting point. And on the right-hand side, it just shows that this is my great-grandfather's membership of the Huguenot Society. So who were the Fonblanques? So Fonblanque wasn't their original name. So Fonblanque is a place. That's one of the things that you need to be aware of if you're researching in France. Quite often you will find out that the person is a surname of a place, or the surname might just be the place itself. So it's a place called Fonblanque in the Languedoc in southern France. And so they became the Greniers of Fonblanque to actually differentiate themselves from other people within France. So they were Gentilhommes-Verrier, and I think they were actually pretty well off. They were well off enough to actually send their children over here, and they went to private school, so they weren't paupers when they arrived. So they came over in 1740, and I understand that they might have come via Bordeaux, where their uncle was a wine merchant. I need to explore that a little bit further. And they set up the English branch of the family. Just to find a little bit more about my great-grandfather and his descendants. So in this case, this is John de Fonblanque. There were several Johns all in a line. Google is one of your best friends when it comes to this. So there's various different books that are actually available. The picture on the right illustrates one called Protestant Exiles from France in the reign of Louis XIV, Huguenot Refugees and Their Descendants by Reverend David Agnew. That's available from libraries or even online via Google Books. Depending on what professions your ancestors were in, there are different resources available for those. So if you had any lawyers, there's a Foster's list of men at the bar. And I highly, highly recommend setting up a Google alert. If you don't know how to do that, Google it, and it's quite straightforward. Basically, what you do is you basically tell it what you want to be searched for, and it will notify you when you choose to be notified. So that can be on a daily basis, it can be as it appears, it's up to you. Remember to put things into what they call speech marks if you want to do more than one word. I could, in this case, have just done Fonblanque on its own, but if I want to do John Fonblanque, I put it within speech marks. And then basically, I will then get a Google alert anytime that a new website is indexed by Google, so that they will actually tell me about it and I can choose to go and actually have a look at it. So, French resources, that's the reason why a lot of people are here on this call tonight, and we want to find out what resources are actually available for us. If you haven't heard of it, the best one I can say to start with is geneanet.org. Now, this is actually a French website, so you will notice that some of the records are actually having French spellings and that sort of thing if you start looking for people's names. So that's one of the things to be aware of. There is a place on it called French ancestors. Search your French ancestors. So within this, you've got lots of different resources that are available. So you can actually go in and search the records themselves, the French genealogical records. You can find out where things are placed in terms of postal codes and INSEE codes. The Geneanet database, that's where people have got things like mentions of people in books and different things like that. Online archives, online departmental archives, municipal archives, military archives, ships and other online archives. And in a moment, I just want to go to Geneanet and just display a couple of records for you so you can see what it looks like. It's very simple to do, and it's available in English, which is one of the important points because some of the resources aren't. It is a subscription site, but it's only £11 for a 3-month subscription, and you can choose to turn your subscription on and off if you want to. So it's worthwhile just trying it, seeing whether there's some relevant records, and if not, you can cancel it temporarily or permanently. It's up to you. Surname origins, there's also something about surnames on there. So it's worthwhile having a look at that just to make sure you've got the right surname, or if there are other names which are very similar to yours, which might be the best things to actually search for rather than what you think your name is. One word of warning is that a lot of the family trees you find on GeniaNet are not correct. GeniaNet is shown in Ancestry, and when you see the GeniaNet records in there, virtually everyone I see on there are incorrect in some way. So be very careful and check the information before you agree with it. One tip for you, I don't know if you're aware of this, French surnames are capitalized. So we completely capitalize, not just the first letter, to distinguish from similar first names like Martin. And they will normally put the surname first and the Christian name or first name afterwards. Right, before we go to that one, I'm just going to move my screen around and I'm going to go and show you GeniaNet. So this is what it looks like when you go into it. So the French genealogical records. This is a really useful place to start because it explains how records are laid out, what information you will actually expect to find. And it splits it by parish registers. And then in 1792, when civil registration starts, you can actually see what information is available on each record, and then the indexes that are available in the civil registers. You have got access to some censuses and military records as well. I'm going back, and again, I want to show you something else. So online departmental archives. This is useful because it will take you straight through to the relevant archives. As long as you know what number it is, so 06 is the Alpes-Maritimes, 76 is Paris, 75, sorry, is Paris. Each one is actually shown on there. 81 is Tarn, and that is where my ancestors are from now. Bear in mind that these are the current names of the areas where your ancestors lived, and those may have changed significantly over time. So you may need to check more than one area. So if I was going to check mine, I would check both Tarn and Tarn-et-Garonne. Genealogy societies. So there's lots of different societies that are available. Some of them are actually American, some are Canadian, all different references on there. So if those are of interest to you, have a look at those ones. Ships lists and emigration records. There's archives in Canada, New France, and various other ones available on there as well. So as I said, this should be your starting point when you start looking into your Huguenot ancestors on GeniaNet. So it's very important, I mentioned just now, that you know how records have changed and where they're kept. So pre-1789, it was actually in the local provinces. Post-1789, it was divided further. So you have regions, and then within region you have departments. Most of those are actually within France, 96 of the 100 are, and there are 4 overseas. They're not territories, they're actually part of France itself. They have the department archives, the town hall, the mairie, have the local records. And you'll find that some large towns will be subdivided, such as Paris, into arrondissements with separate town hall and archives. So you will have local ones that you would need to go through there. So it's very important you know where you should be looking for these records. As I said, many have been digitized and are available online. This is an old map of France, just highlighting an area where my ancestors came from. So you can see in the red box, at the moment it says it's in the Tarn. There's a place called Albi, which still exists. It's just to the northeast of Toulouse. A very, very pretty area of the country if you ever fancy visiting it. There are some fascinating old maps available, and I just wanted to point out something else on here. Let's just see if I can get my mouse pointer clicking. Oh, let's go back one. Sorry. My ancestors come from this area around here. Now, when I looked at the naturalisation record for my ancestor, John Fonblanque in England, it said that he came from this place called Guyenne, which no longer exists. And when I look at the records, he's actually more likely to be along here. So this is where it's important that you check all the surrounding areas for the area that you expect your ancestor to be in, just in case over time it has changed, or it might have been that they were on the borders and some records are held in one archive and some in another. On the right-hand side here, this is another map, and I just want to show that this is where my ancestors came from. It was called the Forest of Grazine, and this is the actual forest here. And the glass blowers would have needed wood, so they would have actually worked on the edge of the woods and used the resources available to actually fire their kilns to make their glass. They would have been quite wealthy, and they probably would have kept their money to themselves. I have Bruniquel being the local town here, and this is where some of my ancestors are actually buried. And indeed, one of my great-grandfathers, one of the ones who actually emigrated over here, he's buried over there because he went back to visit his mother, and he died when he was actually visiting her. I'll show you these links, old maps of France. You can browse it, and you can choose an overlay. So you can choose a different time period and view as overlay. Should work. Browse the old maps again. Let's look at that one. And these are free to look at. You can see it looks quite fuzzy, but that's because we're a long way out. If we zoom in, this is the one that my ancestors came from with the forest that I talked about. It's quite useful because it actually does have the topography, so you can actually see what it was like for them in those times. And another resource, this is actually a German resource, so it's offering to translate it for me. I don't actually need that. And this is where that map that I had came from. And this talks about the different things that are available at the time, all in French. If you can't read French, Google Translate is a great way of actually finding out what is written there. Also on Huguenot, they have old postcards. There aren't that many of them, but it's quite interesting looking at them. It gives you a little bit more of a flavour of what the place looks like. So you can see, for example, how close the mountains are to the local village. You can see that there's water there, whether that would have been the industry was based around water for that place. I'm not sure, but it's quite possible. So that's again on Huguenot and postcards. All of the links that I've put in this talk will be available in the handout afterwards. The next resource I want to talk to you about is called Philae. Again, this is a paid for one, and you can do it on a short-term basis or a long-term basis. It's up to you. This is the record of one of my ancestors. This is actually my great uncle. So it's him and his brother who came across to France and set up the English line of our family. So this is a screenshot showing his baptism record. And on the right hand side here, this is the information that's actually on the baptism record, just in case you have difficulty actually reading this, because sometimes it's not easy to read the old script and to understand what it says. So it's basically saying baptism of Antoine Fonblanque on January 1727. On the 12e, which is the 12th of March, was baptized, and Antoine Fonblanque, legitimate son of the noble Francois de Grenier de Fonblanque, a demoiselle, which is a common word for his wife, Annette de Rigal. And it talks about in the ville of Comiquel, and then it goes on. So I just want to show you how you find these sort of records. On Philae, you can pop in the name. And I recommend when you start doing this, you can look at Philae in French and in English. So I've got the English one on here. If you wonder where it is, it's at the top right-hand side here. I'm just going to do a very open search to start with. And then once I've got some information, I can then choose to actually display less. So it's just going away and searching for things. And so you can choose a time period, you can choose events, so you can choose births, marriage and death, censuses and various different ones in there. And you can then choose which sources. So looking down here, this is my entry. So it tells me it's in the Aveyron archives. It gives the parents' names, the place, Rue Peru, and the details. So if I click on it, this is highlighting what I was showing you just now with the description at the side there. And if you want to, you can set up your own family tree within Philae and add this information to it. This opens in a new window, so you don't actually lose any searches that you're doing. There are various other ones here. So this is another of my relations. So this is a few years later. He is the son of John, number 2, and he was actually married out in the Seine-Maritime. One important point to know is that you do know which areas and archives to search in first. So do start with Unionet, work out where your archives are, and then go on to use Philae afterwards. €12.40 for a 1-month subscription, or if you feel you're going to make good use of it, there are annual subscriptions available. Another resource is the history book here that I've got. History Heroic and Universal of the Nobility of France. So this is something I found on the National Library of France, which is called Gallica. You can search in English, although results are actually shown in French. So you'll need to do some translation if you actually want to look at the contents of anything. There are lots of newspapers and books, and it looks like this. So if I put in a search up here, Fonblanque again, rechercher. Hang on a moment. Let's not do it that way. Let's enter. So I can look through this and find different things. One of my great-grandfathers in this line of various Johns was a commissioner of bankruptcy, and he wrote a couple of quite important law books. So I find a lot of results for him referencing the law book that he wrote. Another one, the Thomas, who was actually, I showed, who was getting married. He was a diplomat. So again, there are quite a few records for him. So you can see all of these different ones here. And then if you want to, you can actually click on it and see the report itself. And it will actually go and highlight the relevant words for you. This guy who was a diplomat, Thomas de Fonblanque, was actually attacked when he was in Belgrade, when he was the ambassador out there, and a Serbian renegade of some sort, I believe, who did it. And he was attacked and injured. He survived, but it made the local news and the national news, so hence there are a lot of articles about it. Huguenot refugees. So if you're interested in how your Huguenot refugees actually moved from France across, and it wasn't directly to England, obviously some of them went through Switzerland, some of them went through Holland, different places like that. This is a good website to have a look at. Now, this might look a little bit scary, but it's in French to start with. If you click on the little flag at the top right, it's in English. It doesn't actually translate the whole of it, but what you can actually do is have a look in here, and then you can search. I won't search by mine in here because it won't actually find them, but you can pop the name in here if you know where somebody came from, and then put a query in and see what results come up. And if you can't understand them, as I said, try something like Google Translate, or get a French speaker to actually translate them for you. And yes, there's a bibliography. I'll just go back to that a moment. There's a bibliography page on here with lots and lots of different articles and papers all about it. Some in English, some in French, some German, Dutch, all sorts of different things. So it's worthwhile actually having a look through some of those and see if they are relevant to your ancestors or the people you are researching. So there are lots of French family history societies, and if you can speak or write French, I suggest you try joining one for the area where your ancestors lived. They will have access to all sorts of things which may not be available publicly online. So they might be like the English family history societies where you pay to join and then you get access to records that are held behind a paywall. So Family Search is another good place to look for research, for information. This talks about the different genealogical societies across France. So lots and lots of different ones and different places. So have a look at Family Search, and I understand that the last talk in this series is going to be about Family Search, so I won't talk too much about it here. There's another website called Genealogy Ensemble, which also has a list of the genealogy societies of France. This is quite useful because it actually tells you a little bit more about it, because it gives the length of time that the society has been in existence, how much it costs to join, roughly. Bear in mind, this might be slightly out of date now, and gives links via email and the society's homepage itself. So if you're interested, have a look at that. And there's also Ancestry. These are specific French records that are held within Ancestry. So obviously you've got phone books which aren't particularly relevant. You might find some older things within this. So French clergy, for example, a marriage index, French records for a particular place, Courchaton, and different people within that. And then there's another group here. So this is a website somebody set up, a family history guide, and this has got lots of different resources and suggestions for what to do if you're looking for French ancestry in general. This isn't Huguenot, this is French ancestry in general. So they've got their own web pages, there's various different pages within that. There are mailing lists, French genealogy societies, and family history centres within France itself. Facebook can also be quite a good tool for researching your Huguenot or French ancestry. I believe that somewhere up here, I have actually got a Facebook group. Hang on just one moment. This specific group is for French Huguenot genealogy, and it's worthwhile joining it if you want to find more about your Huguenot ancestry. They're a very friendly group, and people will post comments on there and queries that they've got, and people are always very welcome, or very happy to help you. So the particular family history group I joined was one called the Tarn, which is 81, the Entrée généalogique du Midi Toulousain. So it's near Toulouse, and it's based in Albi. So they've been going for 17 years, and it was €21 per year, and they actually have their own archives that you can get access to with further information, and a Facebook group. This one is all in French, so the Facebook group does have an automatic translation part of it, but I recommend you try and, if your one is in French, that you maybe want to get some help with understanding it first off before you actually start approaching the Family History Society, and work out how to actually complete the joining form. So on your journey, one thing I'll say is don't give up. It may take many years. In my case, it's probably going to take another 20 or 30 years whilst I just find more things that are digitized, more records. I've reached out recently, or someone connected with me from Australia and has helped me fill out one line on the family tree that I wasn't aware of at all. And so I've recently discovered that I've had my DNA done. So I've connected with some people who are Fonblanque descendants via DNA. And who knows what other miraculous inventions there might be in the future, which will make all our searches a lot easier. Records are still being digitized and may suddenly appear in the future. So try and put some sort of reminder in place so that you actually go and check on records every now and then. It doesn't have to be that frequent, maybe every 3 to 6 months, have a look and see what else is actually there. And do be aware you'll probably go down a few rabbit holes, dead ends, but some may be useful in future. So make a note of things that you discover. So they might be correct. You might dismiss them thinking they're incorrect to start with, but with further research, it might turn out that that is actually relevant to you. Put together a system that works for you for recording your research and discoveries, so that you know what you've researched, where you've been, and what your questions are about things. So if you're not 100% sure about something and why you want to actually research something further. Just a reminder, in general, keep backups of everything, as computers do die or crash, and it would be tragic if you lost everything. I believe in keeping more than one backup, so try and keep a backup on the cloud somewhere and keep a backup on an external disk somewhere, and check that external disk every now and then just to make sure it still works, and if necessary, after a few years have passed, maybe copy it somewhere else as well and check that that copy has worked. Consider collaborating with someone else who's doing the same or similar research, and you can share your discoveries or your techniques of doing something and what's worked for you. Employ a researcher, someone like myself, who can help you if you get stuck. Enjoy the journey with all of its twists and turns. It will be very exciting. There'll be times when you make many discoveries and other times when it takes a while to find one thing. But when you do, it makes it all worthwhile. So a list of the sources and resources I use to do my own Huguenot research will be available after today's talk. If anyone would like to contact me, that's my phone number there, and my email address and my website, emmacox.co.uk, where I have a contact us form, and I'm happy to help with any Huguenot or French inquiries, or even in this country. So that's the end of my presentation. I think, any questions?
So the first question we've got is that my family was supposedly Huguenots from France and settled in Ireland about 1690. If Jenny can find them in France before 1690, can she assume they were Huguenot?
No. I wouldn't assume that anybody was a Huguenot, because people did travel, even if for work reasons, for different reasons. I would check have a look. There was quite a settlement of Huguenots in Dublin at one point. I did find people out there, but yes, you can't assume anything. You do need to check.
Thank you. And give us go over again some clues about how she might check. What's going to tell her they were Huguenots?
I would start by looking at the Huguenot Society page, website, and look at the Huguenot families on there and see if the name comes up. Because it might not be that they went straight to Ireland, they might have been in England for a period of time. If they were refugees of some sort, they might have received money to travel further, they might have been supported by the local parish. So there might be records of that on there as well, but have a look on the Huguenot Society.
Thank you. Second question, is the Huguenot Heritage Centre in Rochford closed or still open?
This is the Huguenot Museum in Rochester in Kent. I believe it was reopening. It closed through lack of funding sometime during the COVID pandemic. I did hear rumours that it was opening up again. The records that were there, I'm not 100% sure what would have happened to those. There may well still be somebody who will actually answer email queries, even if the building itself isn't open to the public. Thank
you. And any records that were there, we presume they're still there?
Yes, yeah. Because the Huguenot Society, there's the hospital and the sorry, it's not the Huguenot Society. There's the hospital in Rochester, the French hospital, and the Huguenot Museum. They're connected, so it's possible that the records might be in either place. I don't know what they're doing with the building. There was rumours that it was reopening, so I'm not sure whether that's happened, how long it's going to stay open. Obviously, if it's dependent on funding, and funding doesn't go very well, but send an email through.
I did have a look on the website, and the information about the Heritage Centre in Rochester looked quite current. It looked at least 2022 anyway, so it's worth having a further investigate there.
Yeah, it's called the Huguenot Museum. I'll put the link in the chat for you. You got it.
Thank you. Looking to see if there's any more questions coming through, and there's not at the moment. So I want to thank you again, and I'll stop the recording now.